for long enough. And so that's where, I start with it. Obviously, first pick the bag, right? The bag that's going to work for you. And that's going to take a little bit of practice and learning to figure out where to start. And so, what you typically get in a 72-hour kit is a pretty cheap, flimsy backpack, right? So my first word of advice is let's pick a quality backpack, maybe something you already used for day hiking, or maybe a multiple day, but a smaller pack that's going to hold up to, hiking. Just imagine your backpack. Imagine you're going for an extended overnight hike, but taking fewer things. So start with that backpack is where I would start.
I agree with that, Shane. When I first started building my kits for my family, I have 5 kids, and I was building my kits, and I thought, I have old backpacks that they use for school. And I also had some like nice cloth carrying bags, like that weren't backpacks, but they were carrying bags. And I thought, I've got to start. I mean, it's better to have something than nothing. And if I had a fire or an earthquake in my house, what can I grab and go? And I had a backpack that I bought. So because I'm the dad, I figured the head of the family needs to have first things first. And that's another way to start too. If you have a family, start with yourself first as the head of the family, or if you're the spouse, or if you're the wife, you're also the head of the family. Husband and wife together are both heads of the family. So the man might carry some things in his pack, and a woman will carry something different in her pack. And we'll get into that in a minute. But I didn't even have backpacks really. I didn't feel good backpacks for my kids. So I just put it in a bag, and they could just grab the bag and go in their hand, and at least run outside and at least get to our safe spot that we determined if the house was to have a fire, a burglar, or some kind of earthquake. So those are the things that, along with what Scott was saying, that I said, if I can't buy a backpack for them, let me use what I have. And it was just, even if it's a grocery sack, for goodness sakes, put stuff in it, make it easily accessible, and so that kids can grab and go.
Agreed. And that's where like most people will start. And sometimes it's like, they'll make the mistake of starting with bags that they have no idea what the bag's about, or they'll buy a bag with stuff, or they'll just go grab a bag and it might not be big enough, or it may be way too big, or it may be heavy. So you've kind of, like what Shane said, you've got to understand. And the more you do this, the more you'll understand what makes the most sense to you based on the scenarios. Like there you go. Look at the screen for those of you guys watching the screen to see what Shane's holding up. I've got a little small go bag as well.
Yeah. So what I wanted to kind of show with this bag is, this is it's the FDE, Field Dark Earth, the tan colored kind of military looking bag, right? And my advice is, you don't need to spend a lot of money on a bag. You can get some pretty inexpensive but decent bags on Amazon, or like Paris is saying, I've got plenty of old school backpacks hanging around, and that's what we started with. They're like, okay, they're a little tattered, they don't want to take them to school. Hey, that's your 72-hour kit. That's our beginnings right there. Just use those. And and I prefer especially for my kids, I don't want to give them a tactical looking backpack because, or even myself, the idea is gray man. The idea for me anyways, is to not stand out and not be a target. Right. Whereas if I look all military, decked out in all the gear, then I'm going to stand out, and I don't want to stand out. I want to blend in. So there's
ratty backpacks. People look at that and go, and move on.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But so it could be full of $1,000 worth of gear,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The more used your bag, that's why I love, you get some bags, you try them out. Like if you've been camping a lot and you're a day hiker, that's one of the best bags to use because it's used. It's experienced. You know how to pack it, you know what to do with it. And so that's a great place to start, especially like a day hiker bag, like a 3-day bag. Perfect. It's bigger than just a standard backpack. Like as an adult, that makes the most sense. It's also got a waist strap. Why is that so important? Because you're probably going to have a little extra weight as the adult because you're trying to help carry stuff for the kids and everything else.
And we're assuming that, with a backpack, you're going to have to go on foot. I mean, that's kind of the assumption of having a backpack, and that could be the case in some instances. I think in most cases, most emergencies, you got your vehicle, right? So it, like Paris says, you've got a little duffel bag. We're going to use the duffel bag because it's going to go from there right to the car. It doesn't, I think ideally a backpack is best because it gives you the most usable. If you need to go on foot, throw it on and you got your hands free, right? but you can throw it in the car, you know, and you know, I stage a lot of stuff, you know. And I also have the aversion of, you know, and I think a lot of people do have the aversion of spending a lot of money on something that's going to sit there and not get used, right? And so spending a lot of money on a backpack, which could very well be the most expensive component of your kit, is a quality bag. No need to go to that expense and then say, I got $60-100 sitting there, it's not doing anything, you know.
Yeah.
It's kind of
I actually met a lady at PrepperCon the first year, and she's like, I won't get a backpack. I'll never get a backpack. And I'm like, so what are you going to use? And she goes, oh, I have my cart. And I'm like, hand cart? Like, what,
like a dolly.
This is, I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's got this little basket with these big wheels on it that she pulls everywhere. She's like, I use this for school. I use this for work. She's a teacher, and she's like, I use this all the time. I've got another one that has all my prep stuff in it. She's like, I can't carry a backpack. And I'm like, brilliant. Like, find what works for you. So if a backpack's not the right fit, find what works for you. Like, because she rolls it to her car and then plops it in the car. So find the packaging that's going to work best for you, but like, make sure you're putting the right stuff into your kit based on where you feel you're going to be, what you need to do. Like your 96-hour basic checklist, it's going to have some redundancies, but it's going to have the basics to get you through 4 days. And that's the same basic kit that you're going to need for shelter in place as you are for, I need to evacuate my location. You know, most cases, if you're evacuating, it's because there's a local fire, there's a severe storm, something's going on. Like one of my friends online, he lives in Africa. His cousin's neighborhood just had a huge flood in Africa, and their house washed away completely. And now there's like an 80-foot hole in the hillside where the house was. So we need to take that into consideration. Say, okay, I need to be able to get what I need and move out if there's a situation like that. They had plenty of time to get out because the flood was going on for like 8 hours before the house was washed away, and the water was coming right through the middle of the house. They had all the doors open. They're like, we better get out of here. And so thinking about those situations, thinking about what's the right thing to do, find what works for you, get the basics in there, right? On our checklist, it goes through things like passports, IDs, birth certificates, you know, Scott, then you can get like,
on that, on knowing where you are in terms of in the city, like when that house was built, did they ever think they were in a flood zone? Probably not.
No. So they were on a hillside.
You go to your website, go to the city where you live. Usually this is available. The city's website wherever you live, go to the city website and look at the zoning and see where you are. If you're in a flood zone, you need to know that. If you're in a fire zone, you need to know that. That's just another resource to be able to help you understand where you are and what might be happening to your particular house, because the neighborhood over may not be in the flood zone. And so they don't have to worry as much about flooding as a disaster as you do. So, all right, go ahead.
Perfect. Well, the rest of it was just like, then it gets into like the fun, like not the as emergency focused documents as possible, but like it gets into things like your marriage license, your important documents, your family history, your user IDs and passwords, emergency phone numbers. Like we give you the full list so you can look and decide what makes the most sense for you. But then we look at like shelter, you know, and Shane is probably the master of understanding what is a shelter. But it's like your coat, your jacket, your poncho, those are all shelters. Absolutely. Like tarp, cordage, because you can tie stuff together. You know, duct tape counts towards shelter. Zip ties counts towards shelter because you can fasten things. But a change of clothes is a shelter. So if your house is a shelter, that's one. Your car's also a shelter.
Absolutely.
That's two.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you guys were saying, plan accordingly for what those emergencies might be. In my neck of the woods, you know, I live right on the fault line here, and which is really the best place to live in an earthquake. But essentially, that's going to be our biggest reason we would need to leave our house. You know, otherwise the plan is to bug in until the bug out location is done. So, you know, we can talk about bug out bags, and we should do a whole different podcast about bugging out. But essentially, yeah, shelter's number one. Obviously, survival rules of 3 hours without shelter. So typically what you see in a traditional 72-hour kit is a survival blanket, which are great. You know, I think you should still have those, but you'll see something like a tube tent, something very flimsy that's not going to really hold up to anything. So you need to choose your shelter wisely. And in my opinion, a good quality jacket, preferably a waterproof Gore-Tex type jacket, rain poncho, something like that can provide for your shelter. You don't have to have a tent, especially for, you can make it for 3-4 days without a tent, as long as you have protection from the rain, just stay dry, stay out of the wind, stay warm. So that's my shelter, is a good Gore-Tex jacket, along with maybe a small tarp or a emergency blanket to provide some type of a wind barrier, or there's multiple uses for survival blankets. So that's where I would start for shelter.
And typically,
Agreed.
I would say, I think you guys will agree to this, is that if you're going to get a blanket, make sure it's got wool or a lot of wool in it, because wool keeps the warmth even when it gets wet. So if you have a blanket that's, if you're in a situation where you might get wet, you want to have a wool blanket, because that's going to still, significant amount of the heat stays with a wool blanket, where other blankets wouldn't, and you'd be freezing your butt off. If
Wool or synthetic. Yeah, absolutely. Wool can be heavy, especially for a bag, and bulky. And that's where I prefer layers of clothes rather to blankets. But that's, one thing we did to practice with the kids is, okay, here's your old school backpack. We're going to put together your 72-hour kit. Go get what you think you want for some, for 3 days, 4 days, and have them pack it up and see what they put in there, right? And
180 pounds of
animals,
blankets and everything. Yeah,
stuffed animals, blankets, and it's full in 2 seconds, right?
Stuffed animals.
So us as parents, we're going to carry the important things: the water filter, right? The majority of the food, those types of things, and let them carry the things that help them feel more secure, and that have some normalcy in an emergency, some games or whatever it might be, right?
We'll get into that list too, like specific. So if you're listening, like, don't worry, we're going to actually cover that in more detail a little bit further down. But make sure what you're carrying for each person is person specific. So as we go through this list, it's just the basic. Like the kid kit's going to be, you're not going to saddle your kid, especially if they're 5 years old or 2 years old, with like an extra 10 pounds of trauma first aid kit stuff, right? Yeah. Here's 100 feet of rope for rappelling and the 2 harnesses. Dad, I can't walk. Suck it up,
and a stove,
right? And that's where I, again, look at your emergency and how you're going to evacuate. And for us, obviously I've got 4 kids at home still, and we're going to get in the car. So we have things staged for quick access. The multiple kits that I have, we have food staged, that's freeze dried, that we can grab a bin and go within a few minutes, we can be loaded up and out of there. So I think to believe that all you need is a 72-hour kit, or just a bag to grab and run out, that may be the case. Maybe you live on the edge of a volcano and it's going to explode and you've got to get out within 30 seconds, right? So prepare accordingly. Whereas we, if I think we would have plenty of time. If there were a fire, if there's an earthquake, we have very little or no notice, right? And so that kind of, that really limits you to even being able to grab a 72-hour kit possibly as well. So, but I think in most cases, we will have time to grab what we've staged, get it in the car, and get out quickly.
Along those lines,
that's what
Shane, I'll turn it over to you, Scott, in a second, but I was going to, along those lines, Shane, is that you should have a 30 seconds to go kit, like a 30-second, like if all you had was 30 seconds, what would you go? And then if all you had was 3 hours, what would you do? If all you had was, a day, what would you grab? So there's scenarios like that's part of running through those scenarios. If you only had 3 minutes, what would you grab? If you only had 3 hours, what would you grab?
Perfect.
Et cetera, et cetera. All right, Scott, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, that's the same thing, like modularize or stage or, time frame out what you're going to be able to take with you. Because the other thing is, if you have all day to prep, do you have enough room in the car to take all day to prep? Yeah. Like, how am I going to carry everything out? Like, we had fires in the city near here, probably 5-6 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, but people were loading the trailers up and last minute leaving Harriman. And it's well, the fire's right there, but we're getting out. And then they're well, we might not get out, but we got everything in the trailer, and the trailer might just go up in flames now. Be cognizant of the time frame you have and how many exits you have out of your neighborhoods. This jumps the curb of we're talking kits, and jumps into the valley of total family readiness planning. For a fire, this is what we deal with. For a wildfire, this is what we deal with. With an earthquake, this is what we deal with. And we'll do a whole series on those as well. But for that 30 seconds, this is really kind of where we're talking. Like, this is the sweet spot. If you go buy one of those garbage kits online and it doesn't suit you well and it falls apart or whatever, like, I don't want to have to say I told you so, but it's like, please be aware of what reality is in your life. And that measure